Launched in late 2018 and sold for only a single year, the iPhone XS and XS Max came out as the successors to the widely hyped iPhone X, the phone that had dropped the home button, brought the notch, and adopted the sort of style and presentation that Apple has more or less continued to refine to this day with each passing year in iPhone. The XS did a lot to sort of just fix what the iPhone X had lacked. It brought a third color option in gold, some basic camera and speed improvements that we see every year, and most importantly, we got a larger size option with the XS Max, something that was missing from the X. 6 years later, the iPhone X is stuck on iOS 16, whereas the XS is fully updatable to iOS 18, extending its lifespan and keeping the XS still relevant. And this presents an interesting conundrum in how these iPhones hold up over a half-decade later. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and there's no question the longevity has been very impressive with the XS and XS Max, as well as with the iPhone XR, the more mid-range option that Apple released at the same time in 2018, having more colors, mainly the same specs, but an older LCD screen instead of OLED. Getting iOS 18 means at least 7 years of updates, since assuming the phones don't get iOS 19, you're looking at the latest versions up until the fall of 2025, when iOS 19 would launch. It could get iOS 19, I think it's pretty unlikely, and even then, most apps do support phones a few versions behind, making for, in theory, many years left before we can even remotely consider the XS and XR anywhere near obsolete. On paper, the XS has a lot in common with even the newest iPhones on the market today. It's got a premium design with glass and stainless steel, 2 camera lenses on the back, full iOS support, Face ID, and the edge-to-edge design with only slightly thicker bezels than what the 15 Pro has, and a beautiful high-resolution display with vibrant colors and true blacks. On paper, the iPhone XS and XS Max are every bit as capable as the top-of-the-line iPhones still being sold today, and even in practical terms, the XS can download basically any app and do basically anything that a $1,000 plus Pro iPhone would be able to do. There are, however, of course, some downsides that come with the age of these phones, and in this video I want to discuss both the good and bad of using a phone this old in 2024 and beyond. I recently did a video on the XR already. If you'd like to see that, I'll link it in the description, but like with the XR, it's not a bad time to upgrade from the XS if you're considering it. And along with this, there's also the potential prospect of the XS being an interesting budget device to those looking at the used market. So let's start with the real major issues that are going to crop up with a phone like this and the inconveniences being posed before we look at the phone any further. The largest problem you'll hear from any iPhone XS owner that you're going to find will be the battery life, and this has unfortunately always been one of its biggest flaws even 6 years ago. The XR with its lower power display always did a better job at providing longer life, and even owners of the XS Max with its physically larger battery are not spared from the mediocre at best power performance, and that's with a healthy battery, mind you. Once your battery health is depleted around and even under 80%, you're likely to notice significant issues, often with slowdowns and seemingly random battery drain. The phones have been used over a half a decade, which means the batteries will have inevitably degraded over time. Even if they were replaced a couple years ago, they've degraded within those couple years. This is the same problem with any older smartphone, and it's potentially even more noticeable here since it never had great battery life to begin with. I'm speaking as a former owner of the XS as well, as I had it from launch up to the iPhone 11 Pro coming out, a phone that massively improved in this department. Apple will replace batteries for a fee, and so that might be worth doing if you've got poor battery health. There will even be a pop-up eventually once your battery does need serviced, but I think at some point it may just be more worth it to look to a different phone if you're getting consistent issues. iOS 18 is not going to be kind to even the healthiest of batteries. I'm on a beta version at the moment, but I can speak to even older iOS versions not being much better when it came to my past years reviewing this device. Now, all this being said, the battery is only going to be an issue for those who use their phones a moderate amount and are not solely doing the lightest of tasks. Things like texting, maybe a little social media, or browsing the web, that's not going to drain the battery too fast, assuming it's healthy, and the XS could very well get you a day if you're not using it too much. But if you do use it for more things, such as particularly video streaming or gaming, that's when you're going to notice repeated issues and your phone dying far too fast. This is a phone that on paper presents a lot of the same experience as a current iPhone that Apple sells, but that battery is likely to pose a very large issue for users. And going to something like the iPhone iPhone 15 is going to be a far and away better experience in this regard. There are some workarounds and caveats to all this, of course. Battery cases exist, there are portable battery banks, just keep a charger nearby and juice it up whenever you need to. For some people, the phone may just be working fine, even with a moderately unhealthy battery. And if that's you, then hey, more power to you. That pun was not intended, but with full iOS support, there's little reason in theory you'll actually need to upgrade to a newer iPhone if you're not ready to yet. In my experience, while the phone isn't fast, the XS does perform basically any task pretty handedly with only occasional lag and slowdown. This is an iOS 18 beta version, the full version comes out in the fall 2024. But most often, if I'm gonna get lag, it's gonna be when the phone first boots up or is trying to do stuff in the background. Something like low power mode can also significantly affect things. The hardware here, however, is still extremely premium and does feel like a flagship experience in spite of its age. The glass back with the curved stainless steel frame feels fantastic in the hand, and having the Max option as well as the gold color offers some nice variety in choice, which was notably lacking from the 2017 iPhone X. The smaller XS is 5.8 inches and the Max is 6.5 inches. Both are a bit smaller than the current Pro and Pro Max iPhones, and the iPhone XR itself is 6.1 inches, which personally I feel like is a pretty ideal size. The smaller 10 and XS always did feel maybe a bit too small. It all just comes down to personal preference, and there's something to be said for having a phone so usable with one hand like the XS is, the smaller one. Although this here isn't actually a XS, it's an iPhone X. I've only got a XS Max, but they're the exact same phone apart from the size, so having a 10 here is just for showing the difference in scale. It also goes to show that yes indeed, the XS is identical to the iPhone X, with the only real notable difference cosmetically that I'm aware of at least is on the bottom of the phone. There's an antenna band on the iPhone XS that is notably absent on the iPhone X. Easy way to tell them apart if for whatever reason you're ever in a situation where you need to. We don't have the 120 Hz ProMotion of the newer Pro iPhones, but I don't think it's something most users will really care much about. The phone still feels quite fluid and smooth regardless, assuming you're not getting any lag from the newer software. Thankfully, gone are the days of new iOS updates brutally slowing down your phone, so you can be confident that the XS as well as the XR runs iOS 18 just fine, even more so on the XS thanks to a little more RAM at 4 gigs along with Apple's A12 chipset. Top of the line specs for 2018. The hardware does still hold up, and while I would not expect iOS 19, it's not completely outside the realm of possibility either. On the bottom of the phone we have the lightning port, and we also get wireless charging thanks to the glass, and fast charging if you have the appropriate power adapter. We do only have up to 4G LTE with the XS, 5G wouldn't come until the iPhone 12, but I don't think that'll really matter for most people. The XS has IP68 water resistance, which should help in cases of dropping your phone into the sink or toilet. Speaking of cases, you probably will want a case for this phone since it is glass. It is relatively fragile. Face ID here is really good and still feels quite fast. We also have 3D Touch. This was the last iPhone to have 3D Touch, a feature mainly pointless now since a long press accomplishes the same thing, but it's still pretty cool, and I've always found it a shame Apple never did more with it. For storage, the XS came in at 64, 256, or 512 gigabyte variations. 64 gigs might feel a little limiting today if you take a lot of photos and video, but I'd recommend an iCloud photo subscription to not only clear up space, but also have your pictures protected on the cloud in case of your phone being lost or destroyed. For only like a couple bucks a month, I actually think it's one of Apple's best value deals, something kind of rare from them these days, so hey, why not take advantage? Let's talk about the cameras, which were touted as probably the largest improvement back in 2018, which is a bit ironic given the 2019 iPhone 11 and 11 Pro sorta blew these devices out of the water thanks to night mode and the ultra-wide camera lens, but still, the XS was no slouch at the time and still takes decent photos today. We've got a 12 megapixel main wide sensor and another 12 megapixel telephoto 2x zoom lens. Most of the photos you see here are ones that I took with my year that I had the phone back in 2018 to 2019, and there were a lot of pictures I really liked. I thought it did a good job at the time, and I still think it did a good job. And that's the kind of nice thing about having a relatively modern smartphone, even if it's 6 years old. It still takes pretty decent photos, all things considered. You've still got a lot of the features you have today, 4K 60, portrait mode, all these sorts of things. And yeah, comparing it with like my 15 Pro, the newer phone is going to be significantly better for sure, but they still capture the same image. The XS does hold up, I think, pretty well, at least until you get into lower light situations. That's where it really starts to struggle with grainy, grayness and blurriness becoming quite common, and again, the iPhone 11 and 11 Pro really cleaned things up in that regard only a year later, but those phones themselves are almost 5 years old now, so basically the camera, considering the age, is pretty darn good on the iPhone XS, and I really wouldn't worry about it. If you want a better camera, if you want something top of the line, then buy a newer iPhone. That's probably your easiest solution. And I would say that you probably shouldn't buy the iPhone XS or the XS Max. The smaller XS at 64 gigs can be found for under $150 on eBay.com without too much difficulty. That's US dollars, and that's not too bad, right? But the thing is, the battery life is not going to be very good, even if it's healthy. And the phone is just older. I actually think the XR might be a better buy. The battery life is not quite as bad, and it's around the same price as the smaller XS, maybe even a little less. But I'd still at least go for an iPhone 11 or 11 Pro or something. Or even better, go up to like a 13 Pro. If you get a newer iPhone, the biggest things you're going to note is the much better battery life, as well as the camera improvements. Everything else, the speeds, yeah, it'll be a bit faster, a bit more reliable, consistent, smooth, fluid, whatever. But the overall iOS experience doesn't change significantly. And that's what, to me, makes the XS and XS Max still feel like very usable and even premium smartphones today. They're gorgeous phones for one thing, that helps, but despite their age, they just don't feel 6 years old yet. Running the latest software adds a lot. And if you're using an iPhone XS right now and you're still happy with it, battery life isn't too much of an issue, then I say, hey, why not use it at least another year, or at least as long as you can stomach it, get as much life as you can out of your phones. I wouldn't recommend buying these. I'll link my iPhone buying guide in the description if you're curious. But in terms of still using them, unless the inconveniences are so large that you just need to upgrade, I think the phones can probably get you a bit longer, and hey, Apple must as well, giving them iOS 18. And so with that, that's honestly pretty much all I have to say. A bit of a shorter one today, but you know, these are good phones that are just a bit older. That's the main thing, and hopefully this helped you out. If it did, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. Huge shout out to the channel members, you guys are the absolute best. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.